The moon is still moving through Sagittarius today, and if you have been tracking the energy of this week at all, you will recognize that this lunar transit is doing something specific and worth your attention. March 11th sits in a particular position in an astrological sequence that has been running since mid-February, a sequence that has included a total lunar eclipse, a Venus-Uranus alignment, and an ongoing Mercury retrograde in Pisces that has been keeping unresolved matters in the foreground while blurring the edges of ordinary communication. After all of that, the moon continuing through Sagittarius today feels different from an ordinary transit. It is arriving into a cleared space, and what it is illuminating in that space is your direction forward. To understand why this matters, it helps to understand what Sagittarius actually represents in the zodiac and what a lunar transit through this sign tends to produce in human experience. Sagittarius is the 9th sign of the zodiac, a mutable fire sign ruled by Jupiter, the planet of expansion, abundance, and higher meaning. Within the zodiac's symbolic architecture, Sagittarius represents the stage of development concerned with philosophical understanding, with the search for truth beyond the immediate and the local, with travel both literal and metaphorical, and with the drive to expand beyond the known into the genuinely new. The symbol of Sagittarius is the archer, specifically the centaur, half human and half horse, aiming an arrow toward a distant target. That image captures something essential about the sign's energy, the integration of instinct and intellect aimed toward a horizon. When the moon transits Sagittarius, which happens for roughly 2.5 days every month as the moon makes its monthly circuit through the zodiac, the emotional body becomes oriented toward that Sagittarian quality of expansion and forward motion. The instinctual, feeling-level experience of the day takes on the fire and the directional drive of the archer. Emotional restlessness increases. Tolerance for constriction and stagnation decreases. The desire to understand the larger picture of your life, to orient toward meaningful direction rather than merely managing immediate circumstances, becomes more prominent and more pressing. In an ordinary month, this Sagittarius lunar transit would produce a relatively familiar experience, a day or two of feeling more expansive than usual, more oriented toward possibility, more impatient with whatever is feeling stuck. In the context of this particular month, following this particular sequence of astrological activity, the transit is producing something more significant. The total lunar eclipse that occurred earlier this month, the blood moon eclipse whose aftershock has been the subject of several days of genuine internal processing for many people, fundamentally altered the internal landscape it moved through. Lunar eclipses are intensified full moons, occurring when Earth passes directly between the Sun and the Moon, and they represent powerful culmination points in the lunar cycle. The total lunar eclipse specifically, with its deep red coloring produced by Earth's atmosphere refracting sunlight, carries a particular quality of completion and purging. What was ready to end. What was being carried past its natural season came forward for release. The emotional and relational material that had been compressed below conscious awareness was pushed to the surface and held there long enough to be genuinely seen. The Venus-Uranus alignment that occurred alongside the eclipse's aftermath added a specific layer of relational and directional disruption. Venus governs what you value and desire, your relationships, your aesthetic sensibilities, your sense of what makes life worth investing in. Uranus governs sudden awakening and liberation, the lightning bolt of insight that breaks open what had become too settled. When these two planets interact in close alignment, the result is a rapid revaluation, a sudden clarity about what you genuinely want versus what you have been going through the motions of wanting, about which connections are alive with genuine mutual investment, and which have been sustained primarily by habit and history. By the time the moon entered Sagittarius, all of that processing had been done. The eclipse had completed its work. The Venus-Uranus activation had delivered its disruptions and its clarities. Mercury retrograde in Pisces had surfaced and resurfaced the unresolved matters, kept the fog thick enough to prevent premature action, and slowly began its process of clearing. The moon moving into Sagittarius is the first fire transit in this sequence, the first strong activation of outward-oriented, forward-moving energy after the extended period of inward processing. That timing is significant. The Sagittarius moon is not arriving into the middle of the processing. It is arriving at the threshold between processing and forward movement, between the phase of understanding what needed to change and the phase of actually beginning to change it. On March 11th, with the moon still in the second half of its Sagittarius transit, the directional orientation of this energy is running at its most clarified. The first day of a lunar transit often carries more of the signs initiating quality, the activation of the energy, the opening of the door. By the second day, the energy has settled enough that it begins producing its more specific effects. The direction the Sagittarius moon is pointing you toward is more legible today than it was yesterday, because you have had time to orient within it. What you may be noticing today as a result of this specific astrological confluence deserves careful attention. A growing sense of restlessness that has a different quality from the restlessness of the eclipse and retrograde weeks. The restlessness of those weeks was generated by pressure, by accumulated unresolved material pressing against the container, by emotional content that needed to move and had nowhere clean to go. The Sagittarius moon restlessness is generated by pull rather than pressure. It is the feeling of being drawn towards something rather than the feeling of being unable to stay where you are. The distinction matters because pull-generated restlessness is directional and actionable in a way that pressure-generated restlessness is not. The Sagittarius restlessness knows roughly where it is heading. Pay attention to the direction it is pulling toward. A desire to pursue something new, not the vague desire for change that comes from general dissatisfaction, but something more specific. An area of interest that has been present but underinvested. A direction that became clearer during the eclipse processing, but that has not yet received the actual energy and attention of forward movement. A quality of experience, intellectual stimulation, genuine adventure, meaningful connection, creative engagement, that has been absent or insufficient in your current arrangement and whose absence is today more acutely felt. The Sagittarius moon has a way of making the distance between where you are and where you want to be feel more precise and more motivating rather than more discouraging. The gap is not producing despair today. It is producing direction. Let that direction have your attention rather than being managed back into the ordinary priorities of an ordinary Tuesday. Clarity about long-term goals is another feature of this transit, particularly in the aftermath of the eclipse cycle's clearing work. The longer view, the question of what your life is actually oriented toward across months and years rather than days and weeks, is more accessible under a Sagittarius moon than under most other lunar transits. Jupiter's influence through its rulership of Sagittarius expands the frame of consideration naturally, making it easier to step back from the immediate and assess the larger arc. And the clearing that the eclipse produced has removed some of the emotional clutter that usually makes the long view harder to see clearly. If you have been feeling like your long-term direction has been unclear, or like the recent weeks of intensity have obscured your sense of where you are heading over a meaningful time frame, today is the day to look again. The Sagittarius moon is providing the conditions for a clearer view of the longer horizon than you have had access to in some time. Conversations and opportunities pointing toward new directions are also a hallmark of Sagittarius lunar transits, and given the Venus-Uranus activation of the last several days, the communication layer of your life may be producing some particularly relevant exchanges today. Sagittarius rules the domain of long-distance communication, cross-cultural exchange, and the dissemination of ideas and information across boundaries. Under this transit, conversations have a tendency to go to genuinely new places, to expand beyond their expected scope and touch on possibilities and directions that ordinary conversation does not usually reach. When a conversation today takes a surprising turn towards something you have been privately considering, or when an opportunity surfaces that connects to the direction the eclipse clearing has been pointing you toward, these arrivals are worth more than ordinary conversational surface content. The Sagittarius moon and the astrological sequence that has preceded it have been creating conditions under which significant guidance can arrive through relatively ordinary seeming channels. Stay open to the unusual direction a conversation might take, and to what it might be pointing toward in your specific situation. The Mercury retrograde in Pisces is still active, and its interaction with the Sagittarius moon produces a specific dynamic that is worth understanding. Sagittarius wants to move forward and communicate broadly and commit to the expanded direction. Mercury retrograde in Pisces advises care around formal commitments and complex communications. These two influences are not simply contradictory, they are pointing to different aspects of forward movement. The Sagittarius moon is reliably illuminating direction and activating the genuine desire for expansion. Mercury retrograde is still asking that the formal execution of that direction wait for cleaner communication conditions. Think of it this way: today is excellent for knowing where you want to go. The Sagittarius moon is providing that knowledge clearly. The formal steps of getting there, the agreements, the significant announcements, the communications that require precision and that would be difficult to revise if misunderstood, those steps remain better positioned for after Mercury turns direct. The destination is clear today. The departure can be planned today. The formal booking happens next week. This calibration is different from the more general caution of the peak Mercury retrograde period. The earlier advice to hold back, to observe rather than act, to let the fog settle before engaging, that was appropriate for the most disorienting early phase of the retrograde. March 11th is not that phase. The Mercury retrograde is still active, but its influence has moved from acute disorientation toward a more manageable background quality. The Sagittarius moon's forward energy is the dominant influence today. Mercury retrograde is simply suggesting that the forward energy be channeled primarily into internal clarity and directional orientation rather than into significant external commitments that require precise communication. The astrological timeline, running through the rest of March, is relevant to how you position today's Sagittarius moon energy. Mercury will turn direct in the coming days, clearing the communication fog that has been a feature of the last several weeks. When it does, the clarity and directional orientation that the Sagittarius moon is providing today will have a cleaner medium through which to express outwardly. The understanding you develop today about where your path is heading will become actionable in a way that the Mercury retrograde period has been limiting. This means that the work of today, receiving the Sagittarius moon's expanded perspective, clarifying your genuine long-term direction, letting the directional pull of this transit orient your attention toward the horizon you are actually heading toward, this work directly serves the action phase that is coming. You are not simply feeling things today that will pass. You are building the navigational clarity that the next phase of your life requires. The Sagittarius moon is the compass. Mercury direct will be the road. Within the broader context of the astrological year, this period, the moon transiting Sagittarius in the wake of a total lunar eclipse and a significant Venus-Uranus alignment, represents a specific and relatively rare confluence of influences that supports exactly the kind of directional reorientation that many people have been sensing is necessary, but have not yet been able to clearly frame. The eclipse cleared the ground. The Venus-Uranus activation disrupted the settled picture of desire and relationship. Mercury retrograde surfaced what needed to be addressed before forward movement could be genuinely forward, rather than merely an escape from what was behind. The Sagittarius moon is the first clear signal of where forward actually is. The instinct toward exploration and expansion that this transit activates is not escapism, and it is not avoidance. It is the natural response of a system that has completed a significant phase of processing and is now genuinely ready for the next phase of movement. The desire to expand, to pursue the direction the recent weeks have been clearing a path toward, to step into a version of your life that more fully reflects the genuine orientation revealed by the eclipse cycle. That desire is appropriate, it is timely, and the Sagittarius moon is providing the fire it needs to move from internal knowing toward the beginning of external expression. Notice what is pulling your attention toward the horizon today. Notice what long-term direction becomes more vivid and more compelling. When you step back far enough to see the larger arc, notice the restlessness, and let it be directional rather than simply uncomfortable. Follow it toward what it is pointing at rather than managing it back into the familiar arrangement. Lunar transits move quickly. The moon will leave Sagittarius in the next day or so, and the specific quality of expanded directional clarity that it is providing today will shift as the moon moves into the next sign. The window in which the Sagittarius moon's particular illumination is available is brief. What you see in it, about where you are heading, about what direction is genuinely alive in you, about what the eclipse and the recent activations have been clearing a path toward, take that seeing seriously before the window moves. Some paths reveal themselves gradually, through accumulation of small signals over time. Others reveal themselves in specific windows of heightened clarity, moments when the astrological conditions, the internal processing, and the timing of your own readiness converge in a way that makes the direction suddenly and unmistakably legible. March 11th, with the moon completing its transit through Sagittarius in the wake of one of the more significant astrological sequences of the year so far, is one of those windows. The direction that has been assembling itself through the clearing and the disruption and the processing of the last several weeks is available to be seen clearly today. Look toward the horizon. The path you have been moving toward is there, and the Sagittarius moon is illuminating it.